They crawl up the mountain, bare hands on the sharp volcanic rocks. The sun beats down on them. It is a grueling test. The island has a secret that it does not want to reveal. They draw close up to the man on top of the mountain, keeping their guns trained on him. He has no weapon. His body is fragmented like an image on a broken mirror, various pieces floating without connection. The brightness of the sky shining between them, the blood of his insides bright red. His head is like a balloon, floating several feet over the rest of him. "Hello, America," the head calls, breaking into a sickly smile. The whites of the eyes are clustered with red hemorrhages. Sweat rolls down the face. The Marines don't know how to respond. They ask if he's armed. The question strikes one of them as funny and he giggles. A tide of giggling comes from the other side of the ridge, behind the fragmented man. The giggling turns into screaming. "What's going on here? You alone?" a Marine asks. The man does not seem to understand. One of the Marines tries his basic Japanese. The man makes a sour face. No Nippon. Korea person," the man says, and a disembodied hand points to a nearby fragment of his chest. "I, Christian," the man says. He pulls a necklace out of his shirt. On the end of it is a small metal cross. A tiny suffering Jesus gleams in the sun. The Marine tries his English again. What's happening here?" "The devil came here." "What?" "The soldiers that built the gate. The child with the command." I don't understand." A wide smile splits the Korean man's face, and he lets out a laugh. And the laugh flees, and suddenly he's weeping. His emotions seem to follow the giggles and screams that come from inside the mountain. The Marines feel it too, the strange urge to laugh followed by a harrowing fear. The sound beyond the ridge rises, the screams becoming louder and louder. A wave of manic giggling joins the screaming so that both fill the air at once. An electric feeling touches the skin on the Marines' arms. They find their minds filling with strange, dark thoughts. Somewhere in a castle in Japan lies a mad god emperor who has sent his men across the ocean to defend his glorious empire with their blood. On the other side of the world lies the great humming factory called America, the heart of an empire of commerce, which once forced Japan to join the world in trade. Machines and flesh now flow along tendril-like courses, delivering goods and death, ensnaring the globe. The sun goes dark, like a light switch turning off. The Marines instinctively duck, then they look up and gasp. Above them, extending miles into the sky, is an enormous metallic cylinder, filling the sky, blocking out the sun. It spins slowly above them, pieces of it flickering and disappearing like the image in a broken movie projector. In a day filled with madness, they find themselves confronted with something wholly beyond their capacity for surprise. They simply mutter soft curses and get closer to the ground. The earth seems to tremble with the sound of screaming and laughing, which swirls like a storm all around them. Somewhere near the beach, a Marine pats another Marine on the back, interrupting his stunned gawking, and shouts something into his ear. The second Marine pats the man in front of him, and the message goes up the line like this until it reaches the Marines talking to the fractured man. Pull back. They are to withdraw from the island. The men do not question the order for a moment. They turn and crawl away from the Korean. Below them, the ashen island flashes with pieces of sunlight that manage to slip through the flickering cylinder. When they are almost at the foot of the mountain again, the man stands up and shouts something over the hideous screaming. The Marines cannot hear it, and would not understand it anyways.
"The devil took Jesus and went to the mountain to show him all of the kingdoms of the world's glory. If you fall down and worship me, saying, 'I will give it all to you.'"
Many people think that Michael Jackson died due to propofol. Not so. He was murdered. He had actually been taking propofol nightly since around 1980, not in order to make himself sleep, but to suppress REM sleep. After several months of REM sleep suppression, the user becomes receptive. In other words, they enter the same state achieved by prolonged continuous immersion in aerosol LSD. The brain can physically restructure itself simply through thought. By reordering thought, one can physically reorder the brain. LSD, or long-term propofol use, makes the brain's neurostructure malleable. High-energy rays from outer space are able to penetrate through the body, and these can lead to random mutations and cancers. Sometimes, they lead to changes that are not random at all. Changes which have been intentionally programmed. Changes designed to bring about civilization-level transformations. Michael Jackson, of course, was unaware of all this. He merely knew that propofol allowed him to enter some sort of waking dream state of heightened creativity. The side effects were horrifying paranoia and obsession, but he felt that he was strong enough to endure these side effects. The success of Thriller seemed to vindicate his theories about propofol, and unfortunately, he was damned by his own success. So, how did he die? Through the lyrics of Another Part of Me, and the vegetable part of Wanna Be Starting Something, it was quite clear that he had become receptive and neuro-altered in line with Master Design 9. But he was considered to be a minimal threat, and perhaps an asset until his mounting financial problems made him a liability. He was terminated, though I'm not sure of the exact means. I suppose it's time I tell you what I saw inside of the magical space pussy. You can believe me or not, what do I care? I'm the guy who's been inside the magical space pussy. My life has been pretty much downhill since then. I mean, fuck Neil Armstrong. What did he see? Bunch of gray rocks? Big fucking deal. I saw a cooch growing out of the side of the canyon. Top that, NASA, you tank drinking cocksuckers. A- Anyways, where was I? Yes, Uncle Adolf. So I was living in Death Valley hanging out with the Manson family, and Charlie kept mentioning this guy, Uncle Adolf, and I figured he's talking about Hitler because he's sort of into this white supremacy thing, but then I started realizing he's talking about a guy who's still alive. And one day, the guy showed up. They asked me to come over to their cabin, and this old guy was sitting there. White hair, deep tan, lined face, pale eyes. He introduced himself as Adolf, and he's got a German accent. He made no secret of the fact that he was an ex-Nazi, and this made me nervous. That's kind of something you keep under your hat. He said that he found Charlie at Berkeley, and that Charlie was perfect for my purpose. I asked what his purpose was, and he said it was testing. I kind of shrugged because I didn't really give a shit about this little coy answer, and I got up to leave when this mongoloid motherfucker they called Clem punched me straight in the face, and suddenly I was just on my ass. There were a couple of girls there, and they jumped on me and held me down and tied my hands behind my back. If I had known what they'd done to Sharon Tate, I would have been unspeakably terrified, but as it was, I was merely just really, really scared. They tossed me back into the dune buggy and drove me out into the desert. It was midday, and the sky was just one giant glare. We drove for over an hour, and eventually they got me out and hauled me down this deep sandy arroyo, and they started marching me down it. They had put wooden stakes into the ground at various points, and when we came to them, they seemed to be really careful to always stay in between the stakes. Later, they had chains tied between the stakes, and we all had to go under the chains like some sort of obstacle course. I didn't know what to make of it. I had a lot to process at the time. I started to notice that the rock walls of the arroyo were abnormal. There were strange striations through the rock and what looked like the cross sections of giant insect tunnels. I had never seen rocks like that. The whole thing was just very alien. Then I started to hear the screaming. Up ahead, I could hear people's voices, thousands of voices, all of them screaming and howling at once. Slowly, incredibly, the screaming changed into a kind of laughter, an insane laughter, giggles and chuckles and titters. I wondered if it was in my head, if I was so scared that my mind had cracked or they had dosed me with LSD or something. Finally, we went around the bend in the arroyo, and, well, there it was. They said it would be a pussy, and I guess it kind of looked like one. Maybe after some drastic dildo mishap. It was just flesh. Wrinkled, lobed, flabby flesh growing out of a rock, like mold or something. It had hairs and pores and freckles. Some of it was pale, some of it was black. It was taller than me, and in the center there was an opening, pink and wet, like a pussy. The Crot told me he wanted to see its level of development. He took a revolver from one of the girls and pointed it at my face to walk inside. It was either get shot, go into the big mangled pussy. It was honestly a tough choice. There was something completely fucked up, completely not right about that thing. Something in my bones told me not to go into it, not to go near it, just to take the bullet in the head. But I figured I could just go in a little bit and wait for them to leave and then get the hell out of there. Not a great plan, but it was the best I could come up with. So I went in. The entrance was just barely wide enough to slip into. All I could see was glistening pink flesh up ahead. There was this sound like laughter, then screaming, then laughter that was coming from deep inside. The walls were blood warm in my shoulders, and the smell was, well, what you might expect. Not not great. Let's just say it was not great. I pushed forward and the walls kind of gave way, and I found myself moving through the slimy, suffocating flesh. And I'm starting to panic because my hands are still tied behind my back, and I'm feeling like I'm about to choke on this stuff. And the walls are moving and like pulsating. I feel like I'm being digested, and suddenly I'm pushed into this kind of chamber. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. The chamber was just a nightmare. I mean, I've never seen anything just like that. It was unholy. There were faces and heads and legs all kind of fused together. The walls were just crawling limbs of these terrified faces, and fusions of teeth and cheeks and hair and fingers coming out of knees. All those people, were they still people? Had they ever been people? Had they become part of that thing? I started to scream. Everything around me was screaming. All the mouths on the walls were screaming, and I was screaming too. And suddenly I was laughing. I felt hands and mouths all over my body, and they were tickling me, touching me all over. Then I was screaming again. I had to get out of there. I had to get out of the nightmare. I started pushing back towards the entrance, but the hands were all over me. I felt something bite into my hip. A mouth was biting me. I screamed at the sharp pain and I moved away from it. I started to think maybe I can get one of the mouths to bite through my ropes, then at least I'd have my hands free. I struggled to turn around and move the ropes toward the mouth, but when I got into position, the mouth just bit right into my finger instead. The pain was incredible, but I was giggling, just laughing and laughing. The mouth pulled the flesh from my finger like it was a chicken wing. Another mouth bit into my shoulder. I was chuckling away at this point. The hands were grabbing me, pulling on me, pulling me apart, tearing my arms right out of their sockets. Fingers were digging in between my ribs. I was slathered with blood and screaming as the fingers dug into my eyes. Well, I guess at this point you're probably wondering how I, your intrepid narrator, managed to escape the bottomless pit. How I managed to survive to tell you this tale. I simply didn't. I never escaped the bottomless pit. I am the bottomless pit. I am the tree of life. The North Korean situation in the 1980s was unique, as most North Korean situations are. They had built something we have never seen before or since. An independent flesh interface of enormous size and power, but within a contained incident zone and no metallic cylinders. We detected it via the cosmic ray information signature, which was concentrated on a secure, shielded facility outside the Hwasong prison camp. This was a huge underground facility which they had been constructing for over a decade. We anticipated that they would construct a portal-level interface and fully prepared to bomb it before it would become uncontained. What we didn't expect is that it would achieve level 7 cosmic transmission rates without all the other abnormal signs of a full-fledged portal. We considered bombing it anyways, or using our Brilliant Pebbles kinetic orbital strike system, but instead, we managed to get 2 agents into the facility to take a look at it. They achieved high-level security clearance and found that the Koreans were using the Flesh interface as an information processing facility. This was quite novel, as we had always considered it to be a potential weapons system. Our curiosity was truly piqued. Clearly, the Norks knew something we didn't. Unfortunately, our agents weren't able to access the enormous mainframe chamber which actually housed the interface. All they knew was that it was in a huge chamber full of temperature-regulated water. We instructed them to breach the chamber and get a look at it, then send us the data by satellite. We knew full well that it would probably cost them their lives, but we pumped them with a lot of do for the planet rhetoric. So, one night, they put on dive suits and went into the chamber. It is basically like a huge lake contained within a massive, darkened steel box. Imagine a flooded warehouse with endless rows of dim ceiling lights shining down on rippling black water. They jumped into the water, and pretty quickly they picked up some pretty interesting audio signals with varying frequencies. A kind of squeaking, mewling sound. They recognized the sound for what it was right away, but had a hard time believing it. Whale songs. The chamber contained several adult humpback whales. How do I explain Mother? What was she? Great Babylon, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I used to lie in my bed, the blinds pulled against the summer sunlight, listening to the sounds of other kids playing outside. I'd lay there for hours, not sleeping, but wondering who had made Mother. She was made from all different sorts of animal parts. One of her feet was a big, heavy hoof. The other was a tiny little kitty cat paw. I could hear her clumping around downstairs. Her smell, the smell of cigarettes and disease, was everywhere in the house, pooling in the darkness. Slowly, night would come. I would imagine myself floating out of my window, floating up into the deep starry blue, and looking down at all the little houses shrinking into tiny boxes. Breeze blowing on my face. Oh, I would cry in my little bed. I was very young when Mother first came. I had another mommy before her, a good one who wore pearls and had a voice like music. Then one day I got sick, a fever. I was crying all day, and it went on for weeks. I guess my first mommy couldn't take it anymore. One night, she left forever, and when I came down for breakfast the next morning, this new thing was waiting for me in the kitchen. At least, I think that's what happened. Mother never talked. She just snorted and made hoarse sounds. Awful. Her parts were sewn together like yarn, and there were patches of whipped burlap. I didn't see her eyes until she had been there for almost a year. Have you ever seen a horse's eyes up close? They're like goat's eyes. They have a sideways pupil. I would come home after school and there would be kids sitting at the breakfast table. She gave them medicine so that they did whatever she wanted them to. It just made them sit there, staring, shaking. Then she would take them down into the basement and make them into things. She tried to make me do it too, but I didn't want to. I realized she was afraid of the Bible. I realized it had power. When I would read it to her, her different pieces would shudder and pull apart, and she would howl like a wolf. And blood would run from her segments. The Bible brought transmissions from the cross that floated into the summer sky. Everything in time is arranged around the epicenter wherein the nail drove into Christ's hand. Lines of possibilities radiate outward from it. Kingdoms rise and fall. Men grow and die like flowers in a field.
And the beast you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction.
So, two of our agents had breached the underwater chamber containing the North Korean flesh interface and found nothing but several humpback whales. Now this was a head-scratcher. We knew it was a flesh interface because it was receiving information-rich rays coming from outer space. Yet, how could it be taking the form of humpback whales? All previous interfaces had taken a decidedly less conventional form. Well, our agents decided to get a closer look. There were 3 whales, 2 adults, and a calf. They appeared normal in every respect, though it was difficult to get a close look at them. They seemed to be in quite a bit of distress, though the agents were not biologists and had a limited understanding of what whale distress looks like. The agents noticed some very low-frequency percussive sounds coming from the bottom of the chamber, which was entirely hidden in darkness. So, they headed towards the bottom, a distance of several stories. There, they shined their lights around and made a fairly alarming discovery. Bones. Enormous, curving root bones, jaw bones, and vertebrae. They were apparently whale bones. They also noticed a large, circular gate on the floor of the chamber, which was closed at the time. At this point, one of the agents had begun to panic. He had come to the conclusion that the whales itself were not the interface, but merely food for the interface, which was perhaps being held in another chamber below this one. There were some problems with this theory. Why use whales, a fairly difficult and rare animal to corral, when they could just use a large amount of smaller fish? Well, it's just a speculation. The agents quickly swam out of the chamber and never found out what was behind the gate, if anything. Later, they gave us some very valuable information on the facility's information processing capabilities, which were staggering and quite appalling to imagine in the hands of a regime such as the DPRK. Since there are no incident zone and segmentations, there wasn't an issue. We were able to solve the problem quite neatly by releasing a nerve agent into the water chamber. The cosmic ray download stopped shortly after, indicating a success, though it did result in the loss of both agents and a major loss of life at the facility overall. Anyways, this was our first encounter with an MBIS, Massive Biological Information System, and a near encounter with what we would later come to call a skin ship. Its destruction has allowed for the continued validity of prime number-based encryption systems, though some of the secrets uncovered by the DPRK during that time have forced us into the unpleasant position of supporting the regime. Blackmail, basically. I dreamt I was a dog. I lived on a small family farm somewhere on the American frontier, back in the time of plow mules and butter churns. It was one of those long dreams that feels like an entire lifetime. I remember the end of the dream with an awful clarity, but the beginning seems like something that happened many years ago. The first images are vivid but disjointed. I recall the shape of my master walking against the sunlight overhead, the smell of his leather boots, the shadows at the edge of the forest, a little pig-tailed girl hugging me, fresh mud in the spring, warm floorboards in the winter. Everything had a peaceful storybook quality to it, except one thing. Sometimes, late at night, I heard singing. It came from outside, out there in the far distance, from somewhere in the deep forest beyond the boundaries of my world. Some nights, it was one voice, but usually it was many, singing a strange, aching song. It sounded like a haunted crying. When I was little, I had whimpered and cried like this to my mother. Who was crying out there in the night? What kind of dark mother was listening? When I first heard the singing, I was filled with a blood dread. The hair on my back bristled, and I growled and barked at the darkness. Even after the night finally went silent, I trotted around for hours in a vigilant anger. Later, as I heard it more often, I learned to accept it with a sullen unease. Of course, this singing was the sound of wolves howling, but I didn't know this in the dream. In the dream, I had never seen a wolf in my life. One winter, I began to see them prowling in the woods. To me, they were ghost dogs, shadows sneaking between trees, eyes glinting in the twilight. I growled and barked at them, but didn't pursue. For several months, they never encroached on my world. They finally came on a late winter's evening. The sun had sunk into an orange glow beyond the edge of the world. The family was in the cabin, and I was out trotting through the snow, anxious to get back to them because I knew food would be coming soon. Then, atop a small hill by the apple tree, an apparition. My body snapped to attention and I growled, the hairs on my back standing on end. It was a wolf, just a stone's throw away from me, its silvery coat half lit in the dying light of day. It came toward me in a sleek, soundless jaunt. I barked and snapped at the air. It slowed and stopped, just beyond my lunging distance. Now, crazed with fear and anger, I saw that it was a large female, healthy, well-fed, with a gorgeous coat, misty gray, the color of snow seen at a winter's distance. Its smell was alien, confusing, but laced with a clear and potent confidence, a supreme assuredness indeed. It did not seem to be afraid of me at all, nor did it threaten. Its mouth hung slack, and steam issued from its muzzle in steady, happy puffs. This calmed me for a moment, and in the next moment redoubled my anger. I growled from the deepest, most murderous part of my dog self. It spoke to me. Its mouth didn't move, and there was no sound, but by logic of the dream it spoke to me in a clear, dignified voice. "Hello, child." I snarled at it, and took another step forward, and its eyes caught the last of the sunlight, glowing in a fantastic array of yellow. Those eyes, rimmed in jet black mascara, projected a powerful allure, an otherworldly glamour. "You bark and snarl, but look at my face. Am I not of your kind?" it asked. I could not answer. I could only growl softly. "Is my face not like your mother's? Do you remember her?" The sudden scent of a distant memory came to me, and I felt a pang of loneliness. I had not seen my mother or any other dog since I was small. Since I had come to the farm, my only family had been the people I lived with and a few of the other tolerant pigs. I searched now for dim, fragment memories of my mother. I felt her huge, bristled muzzle licking my face. I saw her giant, sweeping legs as I followed them through high fields. She had seemed taller than a horse then. What had become of my family? I had spent every day with them, and then one day, all gone. The wolf paced back and forth now, keeping a small distance from me, its eyes ranging over the farm, and again I saw some strange, haunting glamour in them, something that glittered with a secret, distant power. And the people in that house, they are not your family. We are. We share ancient blood. It said, its voice deep and resounding with a rhythm of wisdom. My master had a voice like this, but it didn't have the same total authority of this female's. I saw with alarm 2 dark shapes come over the hill by the apple tree. More wolves, moving silent with their heads lowered. I barked at them. You hate us and love them, but do they love you? What are you to them? Aren't you the lowest of the low? Always getting the last of food, the smallest scraps. Imagine living differently. Imagine taking your own food, killing, drinking lifeblood, being masters over theirs. And 2 other wolves slunk down the hill. The skin on my back tightened again, but the strange hypnotic power of the alpha wolf held me still. You can leave this house and come with us. We range the forest. We've seen rivers wider than this whole valley, mountains that go up into the clouds, lakes with no end but the end of the world, places with no houses or men at all. You could be with us. We could be your brothers and sisters. The other wolves came closer. They were unmistakably females, both young and well-muscled. Their confidence was not as absolute as the alpha wolves, but they showed no fear as they came to me. I smelled on them a strange longing, a deep winter's desire for warmth. The female wolf stepped closer, close enough that her steaming breath tickled my nose. Her eyes danced with cold, burning light, and she spoke in a voice that made my blood hum. Outside your life awaits everything you have never known. There are worlds, child. There are ecstasies. I recognized the allure that lit her eyes, the unspeakable longing that glimmered in their depths. It had seemed this whole time to be some fantastic alien desire reaching out for me from a distant world. Perhaps it truly was, but simply more than this. It was hunger. Plain hunger. That ancient, unsleeping hunger, older than the first furred thing that ever gave rise to the races of dogs and wolves and men. Hunger that had brought this wolf across rivers and mountains and endless frozen plains to meet me in that moment. I can still see her face, the final image of the dream before the other wolves tore into me and I died and I awoke. Her face with eyes that spoke of open loneliness. Her face so noble and so gentle and motherly. Her face as beautiful and ancient as all the stars. What do you do when a child who bleeds and sweats and pees LSD suddenly goes missing? We conducted a massive search, as massive as we could imagine. Almost every mentally elevated CIA department was involved. We didn't trust anybody else. We never trusted anybody else. Shit, we didn't even trust ourselves, considering that it was one of our own who had taken the child. We searched for about 2 months, but never really turned up any leads. Since every other returned child had died within a few days of being freed from their amniotic sac, we scaled the search down pretty quickly. It's one thing to search for somebody like Bin Laden when everybody knows you're looking for him. It's another thing to search for someone who had just worked quite hard to erase from official existence so you would be free to perform tests on her. We felt that the search itself was more of a security risk than the missing child, since she was most certainly dead. But there was also a feeling that maybe it was for the best. Maybe she would survive. Maybe she would live a happy life. Maybe it was best not to know her fate. But then, about 7 years later, we learned what happened. If you'll allow me to act philosophical for a moment, I'd like to quote a poem by Aeschylus that I've actually never read. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. While I'm no literary scholar,
I believe that this means learning can hurt sometimes. So, she had survived. Her genes came up in our program to collect a global genetic snapshot, a total boondoggle, by the way. So, where was she? In some Russian laboratory? Living out in the jungle, being worshipped as a god by some doomsday cult like Johnny Hatu? Floating through space in a bubble to Jupiter and beyond? Estonia. She was found in Estonia, in a Swedish-speaking village on the island of Hiiumaa. She was living a normal life. Apparently, the issue of the bio-LSD had resolved itself after detachment from the placenta. Otherwise, anybody who got a kiss from her would have found themselves going on a very strange journey. She was about 13 years old at this point, and had survived travel for far longer than any other child. This means that she was an asset we absolutely had to obtain. She contained the secret to survivable travel, something that had eluded us for years. It would have been convenient if she was living a life of abuse and drudgery in some orphanage somewhere. We could have simply considered her a victim of fortune. But she was actually living in a quaint little village on the edge of a beautiful forest with an old couple who had been given some phony story by her former agent. It was a nice life. Quiet, maybe a little boring, but a nice one. We took her in the middle of the night back to our facility in Colorado. In the end, she wasn't a victim of fortune. She was a victim of us. TIL. There is no historical evidence for any pirate ever having owned a pet parrot. That's interesting. When I was working for the CIA, we had found that animals could often survive travel through the flesh interfaces much better than humans could. We regularly had success sending dogs and cats through. Somebody hit upon the idea of sending some Gracula religiosa through the interface because they are adept at imitating sounds. This was the next best thing to sending a tape recorder. The interfaces did not accept non-living objects. We worked on grafting a tape recorder to a turtle, but this was unsuccessful on several levels. We sent the birds through, and they returned unencased, but covered with the typical fluids. Those of us who subscribed to the alien theory had high hopes that they would record alien speech. Instead, or indeed, they came back imitating a strange flute-like speech music. The music was quite interesting, though having all the birds sing at once created a distinctly unpleasant effect. Somebody in the department ended up killing the birds, though we never found out who.
After the orbital arrays incinerated the city, they dropped their platoon in to take a look around. We had seen it before, an endless graveyard. Everything ashes, ash buildings, ash people. For 6 days, we trudged through the dead city before finding the first sign of life. On the edge of the blast zone, before the winter fields, a small, flowering bush. Perhaps the heat of the bombardment had tricked it into blooming early. We all looked at it for a silent moment and quickly moved on. We were young and tired and just miles from the rendezvous. Yet sometimes at night, that silent moment returned, and I'd see them fluttering again. In the cold, uncaring wind, doomed flowers, soft and pale.
I'm not sure who came up with the idea of sending a dead body through the portal. It's such a simple idea, and yet at the time, it made no more sense than buckling a dead body into a space capsule and sending it up into space. We wanted to find out what was on the other side of the portal, beyond the event horizon. We had been studying the so-called flesh interfaces for years, and of all the mysteries that surrounded them, the portal phenomenon, the apparent teleportation of objects which occurred within the fleshy tunnel, was the greatest mystery of all. So sending a dead body made little sense. Remember, this is what we knew at the time. If an inanimate object went into the portal, it returned in a short time, no more than 3 seconds later, at a random location within the interior zone. Cameras and sensors picked up nothing of interest. If an animal went into the portal, it sometimes returned either alive or dead. Most returned altered. If an adult human went into the portal, the person was likely to return, but would either be dead or too altered to describe the other side. Those who returned alive died shortly after. If a child went into the portal, the child was likely to return alive, but was invariably altered. However, the altering was relatively mild, and some even remained cognizant. Unfortunately, information gleaned from this was too cryptic and seemed to generate more questions than answered. They all died shortly after. Sending children through the portal was distasteful to us for obvious reasons, and we were searching for an alternative. One day, during an experiment, somebody was about to send a group of genetically altered mice through when they noticed that one of the mice was dead. Perhaps out of curiosity, they sent it with the others anyways, and all the mice came back alive. This was obviously of great interest. Now, we were not only dealing with teleportation, but with resurrection. Of course, we immediately started sending all manner of dead animals through the portal. We joked that if the portal was actually some sort of alien office mailing tube, they'd probably be pretty pissed about all the dead rodents. Most of the animals were projected in the manner of inanimate objects, but occasionally, if they were quite freshly dead, they would come back alive. Not only that, but none of the returned animals seemed altered at all. This was exciting. Naturally, we progressed the people. We wanted very fresh, very intact corpses, so we had to face the question of how to kill a person with the least harm, as the official recommendations absurdly phrased it. We settled on a method of stopping the heart with electricity. Very neat. The first 16 subjects were rejected by the portal. We felt pretty low. In our attempts at resurrection, we were racking up quite the body count. Finally, the 17th subject came back to us. Not only that, but he was cognizant and seemed entirely unaltered. Now, finally, after decades, we were about to find out the secret of the other side. In 63 BC, the Roman general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus marched his soldiers across the kingdom of Judea and laid siege to Jerusalem. Its heavily fortified capital city, known as Pompey the Great, he was 43 years old at the time and one of the most powerful men of the world, an ascendant general tasked with expanding the mightiest empire on earth. In his dealings with the occupants of the obscure kingdom of Judea, he surely had become aware of their particular devotion to the mysterious God which they worshipped to the exclusion of all others. A strange notion for a cosmopolitan Roman, accustomed to the bustling marketplace of competing gods and cults. He also knew that at the heart of Jerusalem there stood a great temple, even more well fortified than the rest of the city, where this curious god resided among angelic statues of gold and other symbols of occult majesty. This temple was the holiest site in a holy kingdom and contained within its walls a small sanctuary chamber known as the Kodesh Hagadashim, or Holy of Holies, where the very presence of this god was said to dwell in the darkness. Nobody in the kingdom was allowed in the Kodesh Hagadashim except the high priest, and then only once a year, on the Day of Atonement, to sprinkle animal blood on the ground as an offering. The Holy of Holies was separated from the rest of the temple by an elaborate curtain, and the high priest was required to ritually cleanse himself before entering. It was said that any unclean person who entered the Kodesh Hagadashim would be met with death, and legend has it that the high priest only entered the sanctuary with a rope tied around his ankle, so that if he died therein, he could be pulled back out. How much of this did Pompey the Great know on the day that the city finally fell after a 3-month siege? He and his soldiers slaughtered 12,000 Jews who were defending the sanctuary, and he strode through the entrance of the imposing temple as a conquering hero to the Romans and a murdering intruder to the Jews. Inside the temple, he saw the glittering wealth acquired from faithful Jews throughout the religion. But rather than wealth, it seemed that he was more interested in finally laying eyes on this reclusive god he had heard so much about. Ancient historians record that he did not relieve the temple of his treasure, but instead went to the Kodesh Hagadashim. Maybe he wanted to see what sort of magical creature could maintain such a peculiar hold over its faithful that they would not abandon the temple even after it was hopelessly overrun, that they would stand and die by the thousands, sacrificing their own blood on its grounds. Perhaps he was unaware of the tales of death that surrounded the Kodesh Hagadashim. Perhaps he didn't know that this was a god which had leveled the world with a flood, which had rained fire on cities, which had delivered the Jews from the yoke of the mighty Egyptian empire, which had destroyed armies and kingdoms. Or perhaps he had heard these stories and simply didn't believe them. At any rate, history records that he went to the inner part of the temple and pulled back the curtain which hid the Kodesh Hagadashim from the world, so that he might stand and gaze upon the very presence of God. The man was an illegal immigrant from Honduras. Illegal immigration has always been a great help to us. Why bother to erase people when they can do it themselves? Anyways, he was under the impression that he had been in the custody of immigration enforcement for the last few months, while we ran the standard battery of tests. He was 24 years old, 171 centimeters tall, above average intelligence. We stopped his heart with electrodes and put him inside the flesh interface. He came back quite jittery and minimally responsive. Posing as doctors and nurses, our technicians took him to a medical room for testing and interviews. We assumed that he had been altered, but we tested his blood for the presence of the exotic LSD analogs that accompany alteration, and there were none. Slowly, over a period of several hours, he began to calm down, and then he began to talk. We asked him what he remembered about the last few hours. He was under the impression that his experiences had merely been a dream, that some sort of calamity had happened during his sleep, which left him reeling. He assumed that the part where we dragged him out of his bed and stopped his heart was a dream too. He said that after that part of the dream, he suddenly found himself in something that looked like a giant sausage casing, like a tunnel of meat. This was very exciting to us because it roughly corresponded to the appearance of the flesh interface which contained the portal. But given how he was brought into the interface tunnel dead and returned within the interior zone, he couldn't possibly have seen the interface tunnel. Therefore, we surmised that he was describing the interface on the other side of the portal. This was our first concrete knowledge of what was on the other side. What did Pompey expect to find on the other side of the curtain? In many Roman temples, there is an image of the honored god occupying some central place in the structure. It can be assumed that he expected to find one of these, but did he expect to find the actual presence of a god? Could he have possibly expected this? For if he believed in the Jewish lore, wouldn't he have also expected death? Wouldn't he be punished for defiling the temple? Would he have been so cavalier about pulling back the curtain? Perhaps he, in his polytheistic mindset, assumed that his gods, which had seen him fit to give another glorious victory, were more powerful than this backwater Jewish god. What did we expect to be on the other side of the portal? Some kind of intelligence, which could explain this bizarre living technology of the flesh interfaces? If the interfaces were the product of some intelligence, was it really something we wanted to make contact with? Did we expect this intelligence to be kind and benevolent? If so, how could we have sent so many living creatures, so many people, so many children to their deaths? What would a benevolent intelligence possibly make of our ruthless, our rapacious quest for understanding? According to Tacitus, the ancient historian, when Pompey pulled back the curtain and gazed upon the Kodesh HaKodashim, it contained no representation of the deity. The sanctuary was empty, and the Holy of Holies was untenanted. He found nothing, an empty room, nor was he met with death. Instead, he strode out of the temple alive and healthy, destined to go on to greater and greater political glory until 15 years later, when he was finally stabbed to death on the shores of the Nile Delta after his defeat to Julius Caesar in the Roman Civil War. As the man spoke of walking through the unearthly living tunnel of the flesh interface, he said he saw a bluish light ahead and heard what seemed to be music, almost like flutes, but much, much deeper. As he told the story, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed wearing a loose gown, his hand wandered to his chest. He touched the skin above his heart. There, he found two slightly singed patches of skin, where we had attached the electrodes that ended his life. I still get chills when I recall how his face changed when he realized that it had not been a dream at all. It was a pitiful, almost childish look of terrible, unwanted understanding. Tears quickly flooded his eyes. This man, who had been brought back from death itself by an unimaginable technology, by forces beyond all our understanding, slowly went limp and died for a second time. And so, we were left with disappointment once again. More mystery, more frustration. We had already heard from our child subjects about the strange flute music, but always in cryptic, disjointed terms. We had hoped that this man would give us something more concrete, but the answer had eluded us once again. So, when we went back to our experiments, selecting a new round of subjects to send through the portal, we had already sacrificed so many lives in our quest, and there was no reason to stop then. Knowing what I know now, sometimes I wonder, was Pompey lucky when he pulled back the curtain and found nothing?